see about that. Nope, that's not right. Try again. Where is... the hell? Shall. Okay, I know one of those was wrong. Alright, that one's actually running. Okay, cool. Oh, actually, I should also make sure that the sound's working, because the sound was being weird yesterday. There it is. I might be peaking a little bit. Let's turn that down slightly. Okay, so let's do the review and have you guys ready for the test next week. All right. So, starting from the beginning of chapter, whichever one was Empire and Wars, 20. So, immediately after the Civil War, what was the main focus for the U.S. government?
Acquiring western territories.
Yes. Westward expansion, getting westward territories. And while some definitions of imperialism wouldn't consider that imperialism, I mean, it is taking land from people who are already there, so, I mean, you can see that as expansionism at the very least. And again, those two definitions do kind of cross over. So while this was considered a pre-imperial move, it was definitely part of this overall idea. Okay. So at the beginning of American imperialism, once we did start looking outward into further markets, I just realized, it's like, why am I hearing myself? Turn that off. Try that again. Okay. Right. As America began expanding outward, what country was the main targeted market for industrial products? Where were we trying to break into in terms of the market? China. Yeah, because big population. They hadn't really the Opium Wars had happened, so Europe was already kind of in there, but America hadn't really gotten in yet, and there was a lot of territory to be involved with, so it was certainly hadn't been fully tapped yet. Let's see, So while imperialists tried to get their hands on China, what island chain was taken over by white plantation owners and American Marines?
Hawaii.
Yes. So while all this was going on, a group took over Hawaii. It took a little while before Hawaii was actually annexed by the U.S., but again, this was a step towards that. It didn't all happen at once. Probably zoom in a little bit more than that. There we go. Okay. So besides the economic incentives, which is to say all of that, actually ahead of usually them sending out the plantation owners and whatnot. What was typically the first wave of American imperialism? Who did they usually send out first to try to get the people in these regions to begin accepting American ideals and culture?
Missionaries.
Yeah, missionaries. They send out missionaries and, convert them to Christianity, but also like American culture, well, Western culture, but American culture specifically in this case. And some individuals and mindset definitions of the day. First, an important individual, because this would come before this definition. Who wrote The White Man's Burden, which suggested that it was the burden of the white man to spread the light of civilization to the rest of the world, despite it being sarcastic because he was British.
Rudyard Kipling.
Yeah, Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling wrote The White Man's Burden. And if any of you folks take my 104 course, that'll be in there as well. Rudyard Kipling writing The White Man's Burden is important in the entire global imperialism thing. Okay. What was the term for those who felt war was necessary to maintain civilization and one's manhood?
Jingoist.
Yeah, jingoism, the people were jingoist, yeah. Jingoism. The people were the jingoists, that's true. Yes, these were the folks who were, let me scroll down a little bit, who believed war was necessary to maintain civilization and one's manhood. These were folks like Teddy Roosevelt, really all the various political and military leaders of the day. I was going to say another individual, but well, no, actually, he's in the question. So, also folks like Alfred Mahan, who I'm about to talk about. Speaking of jingoists, what did Alfred Mahan think would undermine military security due to this group's supposed unwillingness to use force? There was a social issue at the time that Mahan was against because he felt like this would undermine military security. A group was getting more power, and he felt like it would be bad because they were unwilling to use force. Yes, women's suffrage, or the right to vote. Can't have that. Also, imagine Mahan was more than a little bit of a chauvinist. God's sake. Okay, try that again. Just good enough. Okay. All right, a lot of stuff on Cuba. So, beginning with just Cuba's war for independence. Against what country did Cuba fight a war of independence with some minor aid from the U.S. towards the end? Spain. Cuba was fighting against Spain. That's a pretty easy one, if you're aware at all of the history in Cuba. What was the main advantage that the Cuban rebels had over Spanish soldiers?
Guerrilla warfare? Or
It was the tropical diseases, yeah. Guerrilla warfare is more of a necessity. Um, yeah, the tropical diseases in Cuba, because if you live there, you develop an immunity or you die. So if you're still alive, you've developed an immunity. But the Spanish soldiers who were being shipped in from Spain obviously didn't have immunities, and they were not doing so well. Okay. So before America got involved with this war, which was just called the War of 1898 for us because we were only involved for a year, what was the term for the type of, hold on, let me make sure. Yeah. What was the term for the type of journalism used by reporters covering the war, using atrocities to gain support for said war?
yellow journalism.
Yellow journalism. Yes. This was the term for the type of journalism that was used to gain support for the war in Cuba. That often used atrocities, a lot of times made up atrocities. I guess the term today would be tabloids. You know, not entirely true. All right. What was the event? Where are we at? Here we are. The event on February 15th, 1898. Obviously, that's in the question, so you don't need to worry about the date. Which pushed America to war in Cuba. What was the big event that caused America to go to war?
Main sinking in the Havana Harbor.
Yeah, the explosion of the Maine. You got to remember the name of the ship. I actually had a student in my Tuesday, Thursday class. It's like, it was that ship that sunk in Havana Harbor. It's like, you remember the name of the harbor, but you got to remember the name of the ship. It's like, it's the Maine. It's like, right, it's literally remember the Maine was the war cry. Please remember the Maine. For the love of God. Yeah, it was the Maine. All right. Now, before America did actually go over there and get involved, what was the name of the amendment which pledged to aid Cuban independence but limited its sovereignty afterwards? This was the whole, we'll ensure Cuban independence, but only once it's, quote, pacified.
Oh, the Teller Amendment.
Yes, Teller Amendment. The first one in the not-so-free Cuba. Teller Amendment. Yes, this was that. I mean, I know it's the name of a dude and amendment, but it's literally just, this was the, yes. Yes, I was just getting ready to, because I understand that it's like real specific. But this is the amendment that was that pledged to aid for Cuban independence, but also limited the sovereignty of Cuba. So this was, we will help Cuba become independent, but on our terms, which was very important in like how Cuba and America dealt with each other afterwards, and really even to today. So, I mean, I wouldn't get like a real specific question like that, but that's really, really important for how things went and continue to do today. Speaking of stuff in Cuba, what group did Teddy Roosevelt form and lead in the war in Cuba? I was going to say, which you guys may remember from the previous test. Teddy Roosevelt was mentioned again, so I figured we'd ask this question again. Let's see. Okay, oh no, one more for Cuba. What was the term for Cuba's diplomatic position with the United States immediately following their war for independence? So after the war was won, what was Cuba's diplomatic position with the U.S.?
Protectorate.
Yes, they were a protectorate. They weren't an ally or a colony or a territory. They were a protectorate, which is to say basically a territory. They had independence with big air quotes, and they could do a lot of stuff on their own, but if they tried to do any kind of like international deals, they had to go through us. Okay. Yeah, a lot of stuff on Cuba, because, I mean, there was a lot going on in Cuba. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, let's see, I think I've got 2 questions. Yeah. What U.S. military leader defeated a flotilla in Manila Bay on May 1st, 1898?
What U.S. military?
George Dewey.
George Dewey, the U.S. military leader that was in charge of the battle against the Spanish. George Dewey. Yeah, this was the fight where, like, what was it, 900 Spanish were killed, and like 6 Americans were slightly wounded. No, 400 Spanish sailors, 8 Americans suffered minor injuries. Yeah. What was the island chain later taken over by the United States around the same time as the Cuban War of Independence?
The Philippines.
Philippines. Oops, it's 1 L. Although, as you may recall, those of you that were here for the video, it was not a quick takeover, and it didn't end when the book says it ended. It lasted for another almost 10 years. But yeah, it was a hell of a thing. That was taken over around the same time as the Cuban War. Yep. I mean, technically it was annexed by Spain, and then the Filipinos were like, haha, we don't appreciate that. And so we had to fight the Filipinos for like 14 years. I mean, I say we had to. We made a point of it. Okay. So, heading down south to Panama. Nothing over here. So after Teddy Roosevelt became president, who suggested that the U.S. invest in a canal across the Isthmus of Panama? So who was the guy who suggested that they make said Panama Canal?
Mahan.
Yeah, it was what's his first name again? Alfred? Yeah, Alfred Mahan. I mean, you don't need his first name, but I thought about it, now I needed to make sure. Yes, Mahan. I think he was in charge of, like, the Navy. What country did Roosevelt have to negotiate with in order to gain rights to building the Panama Canal prior to an independence movement, which was obviously supported by the U.S.?
Britain.
Well, we did have to get permission from Britain. Yeah, Colombia technically owned the land. Because I remember saying, it's like, I don't know why we had to get permission from Britain because Colombia technically owned the land. I don't know. It was a whole mess because we had to talk to Britain, then we had to buy the land from France, but Colombia actually owned it. Was, yeah, but Colombia is the answer we're looking for. They were the main ones, and then they stalled on it, and Panama had an independence movement that just so happened to coincide with us being there. Certainly wasn't anything that we did, and we supported said independence movement. Let's see. After the Panama Canal was built, what did the president add to the Monroe Doctrine to signal the U.S. intended to intervene in Western Hemisphere affairs?
Roosevelt. Corollary?
Yeah. Roosevelt Corollary. Let me make sure I'm spelling it right. Roosevelt Corollary. Don't worry, it's multiple choice. So this was the addition to the Monroe Doctrine, which essentially, the Monroe Doctrine said, hey, stay out of Western Hemisphere affairs, and we'll stay out of European affairs. The Roosevelt Corollary was basically saying, we intend on interfering with stuff going on here in the Western Hemisphere because we're the big dog on the block now, and this is our place to mess with stuff. Obviously, minus Canada, because we don't feel like bothering Britain that much. While the Fenians are doing their best to make us go to war with Canada, but that's a separate story. All right, on to Asia. Let's see. Boop, boop, boop. Within China, what was the name of the nationalist uprising which America helped to suppress in order to gain a foothold? So what was the big nationalist uprising in China?
The Boxer Rebellion?
Yeah, Boxer Rebellion. Boxer Rebellion. Again, I mean, I took a modern China course, and that was like a month of the course was just the Boxer Rebellion. So that's something that will forever stick with me. I think I ended up doing a paper on it. That's probably why it will also stick with me. Meanwhile, over in Japan, in 1904 1905, what country did Japan defeat in order to gain international prestige?
Russia.
Russia. Japan beat the crap out of Russia. And after said war, the Russo-Japanese War, what American president helped to settle the peace terms and then sent the U.S. fleet on something of a victory lap?
Roosevelt.
Yes. Teddy Roosevelt was still president and helped to broker peace terms between Japan and Russia. And then he's like, look how peaceful we are. Here's our Navy. And then sent the Navy around the world. they were dealing with they gained international prestige.
Oh, thank you.
The actual war was over like Chinese land that they both claimed. But as far as my question, yeah, they gained international prestige by winning the war. Yeah, it was over like Manchuria and Korea and land that was technically China's, but both both Russia and Japan claimed as rightfully theirs. Okay. On to World War I, which I just got done with that in my European class, and that's like an entire chapter. So for a second there, I was confused, like why is that just like one section? But because this is American history, and we don't talk that much about World War I, relatively speaking. Okay. So, World War I. Before it even began, let me get this over here. What country did the United States have diplomatic tensions with, resulting in a failed raid across national borders?
Mexico?
Yeah, we nearly had a war with Mexico over like who they decided to have leading them. So that was a whole mess. All right. Another important question here. What was the event that started World War I in Europe? Well, sparked World War I in Europe, I should say. There's a difference there.
The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Yes. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. All right. During the Great War, the British used a blockade against the Central Powers. How did the Germans respond? How does one respond against an overwhelming naval blockade if you're Germany?
The U-ships.
Yeah, the U-boats. The undersea boot. Let's see. What cruise liner was sunk by Germans, which prompted many Americans to call for war? Lusitania. Yes. This was the cruise liner that was sunk by Germans, German U-boats, in fact. That's why I put it after that. And it caused a lot of Americans to call for war. This wasn't what caused America to go to war, but it caused a lot of Americans to turn from a stance of neutrality. Let me see something here. Okay. What missive or telegram was one of the last tipping points towards America joining the First World War?
The Zimmerman telegram.
Yeah, the Zimmerman telegram or Zimmerman note. as it's usually called here in America.
And they said there was some other thing that encouraged people to want to go to the war.
Hmm. There was no like. There was no like main incident. There was no final major tipping point. Yeah, it was just like everybody finally got tired of like German aggression, and they finally sort of pushed towards the war. It wasn't like not like World War II, where there was a definite 100% event that caused America to get involved. Okay, and as far as Wilson's hope for a lasting peace, I hope you guys remember this. What was the main aspect of Wilson's 14 points, which he felt would keep another world war from happening? The big thing in the 14 points I told you guys to remember.
It was like the international, like, treaty.
It was his big plan, his big baby.
The League of Nations.
Yeah, the
I
League.
can't remember its name.
Yeah, because it didn't last very long.
United Nations.
Yes. The League of Nations. All right. Now, the main part of the World War I chapter or the World War I section, was really how it was fought at home. So let's discuss a few of those. Oh, actually, no, there's one more. I missed this. What event in Russia weakened the Allies and made the ending of the war that much harder?
Or the Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah, I was going to say, what caused Russia to pull out of the war? The Bolshevik Revolution ended the Tsarist regime in Russia, and they're like, hey, we're not the Russia that joined the war, so we're gone. Bye, guys. They also had their own civil wars to deal with, so they got their own problems. All right, back to America. This is going to be the start of a trend. Who was in charge of the Food Administration in the U.S. said children planting vegetable gardens was just as real and patriotic an effort as the building of ships and the firing of cannon. Who was the dude in charge of a federal agency? It's always the same dude.
Oh, Herbert Hoover.
Yeah, it's Hoover. It's always Hoover. It's going to be Hoover. There's going to be several federal questions here. Although I did miss I don't have an FBI question in here, unfortunately. Yeah. What two acts passed by Congress in 1917-1918 were used to keep people from speaking out against the draft or expressing any ideals that were seen as un-American? So what two acts were made to basically prevent free speech?
Yes, Espionage and Sedition Act.
Yeah, espionage and sedition, which again, any of those of you that were here last semester should remember those. The Espionage and Sedition Acts, which were literally two of the acts that were passed like back during Thomas Jefferson's day. So this was, again, to keep people from speaking out against the draft or expressing un-American ideals. Let's see.
Hoover, did you say he was just in charge of the association?
Hoover was in charge of the Food Administration.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. in this particular question. We'll be back for Hoover later. We'll be back for Hoover. Who got in trouble for saying the draft was a form of slavery, was sentenced to 10 years in prison, though he was pardoned after 3?
Eugene V. Debs.
Eugene V. Debs. Another guy we'd seen before. Although this is his last show for our class. And finally, at least for this section, though he got it ratified in Europe, he got the treaty ratified in Europe. Who led the anti-treaty action against Wilson in the United States? So who was Wilson's main opponent in the U.S. when it came to trying to ratify the treaty? Which is to say the League of Nations, for the most part.
The French President George Clemenceau.
No, in the U.S.
Going to the U.S.
No, Clemenceau ratified the treaty. He got it done in Europe. It was the U.S. that gave him the problem.
Oh, I think Congress.
Yeah, there was one guy that was leading the anti-treaty charge.
Henry Cabot Lodge.
Yeah, Lodge. Henry Cabot Lodge led the anti-treaty action against Wilson in the U.S. All right, back to America. War's over. Everything's fine except it's not. So let's see how we're doing. What was the name for the general fear of communism overrunning America?
The Red Scare.
Red Scare. That one's easy. In response to the Red Scare, what series of legal crackdowns saw American liberty suspended for the sake of safety from the communist threats? So what was the response to the Red Scare that suspended a lot of American freedoms because them communists are going to get us? I said this was McCarthyism before McCarthy was even a thing.
I see the Palmer Raids. I don't think that's it.
That's it.
Oh.
Yep, Palmer Raids. The Palmer Raids went through and harassed a bunch of people and deported a bunch of immigrants with very little evidence. And by the end of it, a lot of Americans realized that the Palmer Raids were actually a lot more dangerous than like a couple of maybe communists. Speaking of which, in response to the Palmer Raids, what group was formed in order to protect American liberties and freedoms from government overreach?
The American Civil Liberties Union.
Yeah, American Civil Liberties Union.
Protect the liberties and freedoms from what?
American government overreach. This would normally be where I should have put a question about Hoover being in charge of the Bureau of Investigation, and the ACLU also was formed to deal with that because the Bureau of Investigation was being used to spy on American citizens.
What was it? The thing you said that it was limited by the Palmer Raids? It was something.
Oh, they just like limited people's freedoms and yeah, just like went around and arrested people without telling them why, and you know, all the stuff you would normally expect. They're just like, yeah, just pulling people out of their homes and raiding their businesses and all sorts of stuff. We had other stuff going on in 1918. More devastating than the Great War itself. What natural disaster hit in 1918, killing between 50 to 100 million people worldwide? Yeah,
Really counted?
50 to 100 million. Known as the Spanish flu, although again, it didn't come from Spain. Spain was just the first country to report on it. All right. Oh, hey, racism. It's always fun to talk about. In what American city did the worst racial violence known as the Red Summer occur? And there were a lot of cities involved, but we talked about one in particular.
Oh, Chicago.
Chicago. Do I have? Ah, yes, I do. Okay. Where was the Ku Klux Klan refounded in the 1920s? This is a little further down in the notes, but I figured it would, thematically, it went together. This is in the social new morality section.
Oh, at Stone Mountain.
Stone Mountain, Georgia. And what were the two symbols of the Klan after their refounding? What were the two symbols that they...
The American flag and the burning cross.
Yes, American flag. Don't mix the two up. And burning cross. Oops. All right. On to economic stuff, which isn't all that exciting, but it's important because we are talking about the Roaring Twenties. Let's see. Production line. The automaker perfected the assembly line and pushed the second industrial revolution in the U.S. Ford, of course. Again, did not invent the car. Please, if you write a paper on Ford and you say invented the car, you will fail. Now I won't fail you, but I will be unhappy. Let's see. Loans. Europe and especially Germany hard pressed to repay war loans. What system of revolving door loans did the United States set up to get recovery funds flowing? What was the system of loans that were set up by the United States to help Europe and unfortunately tied everything together, so once that fell through, everything fell through?
What's the question?
The revolving, what was the name of the war loans, or the revolving door loans that helped Germany repay their war loans to France and Britain?
All I'm seeing is just the revolving door payment plan.
Can you find the name of that?
Corporation?
It was named after I guess it's a senator?
Oh, Charles Darwin?
Mm-mm. It's a name we've had a long time ago. Like, literally not in this class. Back in 101, but not the same guy. Yeah, the Dawes Plan.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was just gonna dive into Woolworths.
Yeah, it's not the Dawes Act from like 101 with the Native Americans, but it's the Dawes Plan, same spelling. That's the revolving door loans. A couple of other economy things before I move on to the next section. What was the name of the scandal that saw government officials divvying out land to the Mammoth Oil Company for under-the-counter cash? Remember, this was just the big scandal I told you guys that you might as well remember because that's the one big one. It's named after the I guess it's like a rock formation in the national park. They had all those pictures of it, like the thing that it was named after.
Teapot?
Yeah, the Teapot Dome scandal. Just remember, this was involved with the Mammoth Oil Company, and the government was like giving them under-the-counter money. Just basic government corruption. The usual. So do I have anything else there that would go? No. Who was the Secretary of Commerce? Pushed the American plan of tying health insurance and pension plans to jobs in order to weaken unions. Who was in charge of a federal agency? Hoover. In this particular case, again, Secretary of Commerce, this was the American plan to weaken unions. Where did real estate speculation boom in the 20s, only to crash after storms caused land value to drop in 1926 and 1928? Where would we have lots of storms all the time, all together, and cause land values to plummet? Can you think of anywhere? Florida. Yeah. Florida, I mean, it's just a swampland, and then the hurricanes roll through, and it's just underwater. Very good. All right. Do a couple of things here with well, can't say too much without giving away the answers. What was the belief system, or the name of the belief that the Bible was meant to be read literally, which was in response to changing moral values in the United States?
Fundamentalism.
Yeah, fundamentalism. It doesn't matter. Fundamentalism. What scientific idea became a problem for the fundamentalists, culminating in a court case in Dayton, Tennessee? What scientific idea did the fundamentalists not like? Evolution. And finally, for this section, who wrote on the origin of species, which caused the issue of, well, the issue of evolution in the previous one is more about like human evolution.
Charles Darwin.
Yeah. Charles Darwin wrote on the origin of species and described his basic ideas of evolution, which have been further expanded upon in more modern days. Okay, Great Depression. We got 2 questions for that, and then we're done, minus the extra credit, which you guys can find out on Monday. What event on October 29th, 1929 began the Great Depression in America, or at least started, or was the starting bell for it, and consequently the rest of the world?
Black Tuesday or the stock market crash.
Stock market crash. And finally, I think that's it, yeah. Who was the President of the United States at the beginning of the Great Depression? Hoover. It's always Hoover.
That's who they blame all of the world.
Yep. Okay. Cool. We're done 15 minutes early. Any questions? All right. I'll see you guys on Monday. Yeah, have a good weekend. I guess that's it.